From forgotten folklore to hidden histories, some records demand to be found.
The first thing they found was not a body. That is what the foreman kept saying afterward, when the police asked him to go through it again. He said the men had not found a body, they had found a hand. It was just after 2 a.m. on a fenced-off construction site in eastern Hong Kong, the kind of place that does not look strange in daylight. Steel rods, floodlights, muddy tire tracks, a temporary office with instant noodles stacked beside the kettle. The old block had been knocked down months earlier. In its place, the developer planned a tower of small private flats with a shopping arcade below. Clean glass, pale stone, a name in English that made it sound like a garden. But at night, when the harbor fog moved in and the cranes stopped turning, the site looked unfinished in a different way. Not half-built, half dug up. The night crew had been working late because the foundation pour was already behind schedule. Rain had softened the ground all week, and the excavator kept sinking into a patch near the back wall, close to where the old refuse room used to stand. Every time the machine scooped earth from that corner, the pit filled again with dark water. Not brown, the workers said, black, thick enough that the floodlights did not reflect on it properly. One of the younger men joked that the land was hungry. Nobody laughed. Around 1:45, the excavator bucket scraped against something hard. The operator thought it was old concrete, maybe a footing from the demolished building. He reversed, lowered the bucket again, and brought up a clump of soil wrapped around a strip of rotted cloth. Something pale hung from the mud. At first, under the lights, it looked like a broken mannequin hand. Then the fingers moved. Not much, just enough for 3 men to see it. The index finger curled inward, slow and deliberate, as if someone under the ground had felt the cold air and wanted to pull the hand back. The operator jumped down from the cab and vomited beside the tracks. The foreman shouted for everyone to stop. Someone called the police. Someone else, older, from Chu Chao, stepped back until his shoulders hit the metal fence and began muttering that this was Young Si Day, corpse-raising land, what the older workers called Young Si Day. He said it softly at first, like the words themselves might wake something. By the time the police arrived, the hand was still. The body beneath it had not been buried in a coffin. It had been folded into the earth, knees drawn toward the chest, spine bent at an angle no living person could hold. There were no shoes, no watch, no identity card, only a small red cloth bag tied around the neck with blackened string. The officers did what officers do. They sealed the site, photographed the pit, called for forensic staff. The developer sent 2 representatives in pressed shirts who stood outside the fence pretending not to be afraid. The foreman gave his statement 3 times and changed one detail each time. First, he said the fingers had shifted because mud slid off them. Then he said maybe the light had tricked him. By dawn, he said he had not seen anything move at all. You can make a man deny what he saw. You cannot make him come back to the same hole after dark. The oldest worker was named Leung. He had spent 40 years on Hong Kong sites, from public housing estates, gonguk, to hotel towers, to luxury flats built so quickly they seemed to grow out of debt instead of concrete. He had seen bones before. Old villages, wartime shelters, forgotten graves under car parks. Hong Kong is layered that way. You dig for profit, and sometimes you find someone who was never meant to be disturbed. But this was different. Leung noticed the soil first. The patch around the body was cold enough to steam in the humid air. He noticed the smell too. Not rot, not sewage, but something medicinal and sweet, like old incense soaked in rainwater. And when the forensic team lifted the red cloth bag, he saw the shape printed in dirt beneath it. 4 dark marks pressed into the dead man's chest, one at each corner, as if someone had once pinned him down with invisible nails. Leung crossed himself, though he was not Christian. Then he spat into the mud and whispered for the dead to forgive men who only worked for wages. By noon, the news had already spread through the district, a body under a construction site. People said the plot was cursed. People said the land was bad. Someone claimed the old building had been a hung jack, an unlucky flat where a widow had hanged herself in the 70s. Someone else said the place had once been beside a wartime execution ditch. By evening, every auntie at the wet market had a version. The corpse had no face. The corpse had hair down to its waist. The corpse had opened its eyes when they brought it out. None of that was in the report. The report said unidentified male remains, advanced decomposition, cause of death pending, site investigation ongoing. Reports are written for people who sleep well. That night, the developer ordered a baise gok, a four corners offering, not officially, of course. Officially, they were reviewing safety conditions. Unofficially, a man came through the side gate after midnight, carrying incense, rice wine, fruit, and a bundle of paper offerings tucked under one arm. He was not a monk, at least not the kind people expected. The workers called him Fat Si, a ritual specialist, and left it at that. No one asked too many questions when a man arrived after midnight, took cash in an envelope, and refused to give his full name. He was thin, middle-aged, with tired eyes and a white polo shirt buttoned all the way up. He did not chant loudly. He did not perform for the men watching from the temporary office. He placed offerings at the four corners of the site and spoke in a low voice, almost conversational, as if apologizing to tenants who had been locked out by mistake. At the final corner, near the pit, he stopped. The incense in his hand bent sideways, without wind. He looked down into the earth. The floodlights hummed above him. Somewhere beyond the fence, buses sighed along the main road. And upstairs in the neighboring towers, hundreds of people slept behind curtains, stacked high in the dark. The Fatsi said one sentence to the developer's man, "You didn't call me early enough." The developer's man asked what he meant. The Fatsi did not answer. He crouched beside the pit, took a pinch of wet soil between his fingers, and smelled it. His face changed then. Not fear exactly. He recognized it. He told them the ground was not simply unlucky. It was Gik Day, a place where the yin had sunk too deep and stayed, the kind of land where the dead do not dry, do not lighten, do not leave. Then he asked whether the corpse had been found facing down or facing up. The foreman said facing down. The Fatsi closed his eyes. Nobody moved. Even the generator seemed to lower its voice. Finally, he stood and told them to cover the pit before sunrise. Not with concrete, not yet, but with clean boards and red string. He told them no one should step across it. He told them no one should call the dead by name, even if they learned it. The developer's man gave a nervous little laugh and said they did not know the name anyway. From the bottom of the pit, under the boards they had not yet placed, something knocked once, then twice, then a third time, slow and patient, like a neighbor on the other side of a wall.
In Hong Kong, space costs more than gold. The city stacks its people 40-50 floors into the sky. Families pressed together in concrete boxes barely wider than a car. Mr. Wong was not a man who believed in ghosts. He believed in numbers, square footage, and resale value. When the real estate agent walked him onto the 9th floor and showed him the price, half of market value, that was all Mr. Wong needed to see. The old furniture came with the flat, a brown sofa with sagging cushions, a wardrobe with chipped lacquer, a television set from the 1990s, a dining table scarred by decades of use. They were worn, but still usable, he thought. The agent mentioned the previous tenants had died inside the flat. Years ago, Mr. Wong did not ask for details. Ghosts, curses, bad energy, he did not care. Months later, a friend from the mainland called. His family wanted to see Hong Kong. Mr. Wong offered them the flat, free, a favor. He told them where the key was hidden. He did not mention the furniture. He did not warn them about anything. He had nothing to warn them about, or so he told himself. The family arrived on a Tuesday evening. The air was thick and wet, the kind of humidity that clings to your skin before you even step inside. The hallway hit them first. The smell of bleach and rust, old cooking oil trapped in the paint, something sour underneath that could not be scrubbed away. A single fluorescent tube flickered overhead, buzzing at a frequency that vibrated in the teeth. The walls were painted a green that had yellowed into something that had no name anymore. On the 9th floor, the corridor stretched into darkness. Half the bulbs were dead. The ones that still worked cast small islands of sickly light, and between them the dark was absolute. The family walked through it, their footsteps echoing off tiles that had been laid in the 1980s and never replaced. The key turned in the lock with a scrape of metal against metal. Inside, the air was still, not fresh, still, as if nothing had moved through it in a very long time. The mother opened the refrigerator to put away groceries. It was running. She could feel the cold air on her face, and something about it made her pause. The hum of the motor, the way the interior light came on, as if the apartment had been waiting for someone to come home. She closed the door. She told herself it meant nothing. The family went to bed around 11. The children shared a small room at the end of the hall, where the only window looked out onto a narrow air shaft, a brick wall 3 feet away, the smell of someone else's cooking drifting up from below. The parents took the main bedroom. The wardrobe doors stood open just slightly, and in the gap, you could see the darkness inside. At 1 in the morning, the television turned on. There was no click and no surge. The screen simply came alive, a gray fuzz of static that cast pale, shifting light across the living room. The father woke to the glow leaking under the bedroom door. He walked into the living room and stood before the screen, watching the static hiss. He turned off the television and went back to bed. 10 minutes later, it turned on again. This time he unplugged it and stood there in the dark, breathing, waiting, until he was sure it would stay dead. Then he went back to bed and lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to his own heartbeat. Then he heard the scratching, fingernails dragging against wood from somewhere inside the walls. Each scrape traveled from one end of the apartment to the other, trailing along the plaster with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The mother heard it too. Neither of them spoke. They lay in the darkness with their eyes open, breathing quietly until the first gray light of dawn touched the window. When they checked the children's room, one of the beds was empty. The younger boy, 6 years old, was gone. They called his name, but the silence of the apartment swallowed their voices. Then they heard him crying somewhere in the flat. The sound was small and thin, like something trying not to be heard. They followed it through the hallway. The bathroom was dark and empty. The kitchen looked untouched at first, but then they noticed the bottles on the counter, soy sauce among them, all standing open, their caps unscrewed and set aside with care. The crying was coming from the living room. The father stepped inside. At first he saw nothing. The room was dim, with morning light barely reaching through the blinds. Then his eyes found the far corner beside the television, where the old sofa cast its longest shadow. The boy was there, sitting on the floor with his back to them. They rushed to him. His face was smeared and his clothes were wet and dark. He was covered in the contents of every open bottle. The smell was sharp and sour and sweet all at once. Everything they had heard in the night, the television turning on and the scratching in the walls, had been loud and deliberate, meant to be heard. But this was different. This had been done in perfect silence while they slept, painted across the child's skin and hair, as if someone had played a long, patient game with him in the dark while the rest of the family breathed only a wall away. The child could not speak. He could only shake. The mother grabbed him. The father ran for the other child and returned, carrying the older boy still half asleep and confused, asking what was happening. There was no time to answer. They did not pack and they did not call. They simply ran for the front door. The handle would not turn. He threw his shoulder against the door and heard a dull thud as the wood held firm. Nothing. They were locked in. The father called Mr. Wong with a shaking voice. Mr. Wong said he would come. The family huddled in the center of the living room. The mother holding the younger boy, the father with the older one pressed against his side, staying away from the walls, away from the kitchen. The younger child was still crying. Mr. Wong arrived 20 minutes later. The hallway was dark, with more bulbs dead than before. Or perhaps they had always been dead and no one had noticed. He walked to the door, took out his key, and inserted it into the lock. From the keyhole, a thick red liquid began to ooze. It did not spray or leak. It pushed through the narrow slots slowly and deliberately, like blood seeping from a wound that had just been opened. Before it could reach his fingers, Mr. Wong pulled the key out. More followed, welling up from the slot and spilling over the lip of the keyhole. He dropped the key and the metal clattered on the tiles. The liquid was already on his fingers, warm and oily, and it dripped onto the floor tiles. The sound of each drop was distinct in the silence. Mr. Wong stared at his hand. Red pooled on the ceramic tiles at his feet. The smell reached him. Copper and rust and something sweet underneath, like rotting meat left too long in the sun. He backed away, then turned and ran. He did not stop until he reached the street. He stood on the pavement, pale and shaking, his hands still wet. A local cleaner was sweeping the entrance, the bristles scraping against concrete in a steady rhythm. She saw his face and asked if he was all right. He told her which flat he owned. The cleaner stopped sweeping and set her broom down. "That flat," she said, her voice low. "The family who lived there, the father, the mother, the grandmother, 2 children, they all died inside." She let the words settle before continuing. "He knew a man, a master, a Fa-Tse who deals with these things. You should call him." Mr. Wong called Master Lee, who arrived before noon with 2 assistants. The hallway on the 9th floor was cold, despite the summer heat pressing against the building from outside. The red liquid had dried into a dark crust around the keyhole, like old blood, like rust, like a wound that had closed but would never heal. Master Lee stood before the closed door and lit a bundle of incense. He spoke to whatever was on the other side in a voice that was calm and measured, carrying the weight of someone who had done this many times before. He apologized and explained that the new tenants had not known. He offered to perform the Bai Se Gok, the worshipping of the 4 corners, right there. He offered to burn offerings and make amends. The incense smoke, which had been rising straight, suddenly twisted and flattened, blown back toward Master Lee as if the air itself had turned against him. One of the assistants stepped back. The spirits refused. A long silence followed. They were too angry. The family had slept in their beds, used their furniture, eaten at their table. The dead do not forget the living who trespass upon their space. Master Lee gave the order. The assistants brought a crowbar to the door. 3 strikes. The first cracked the frame with a sound like bone breaking. The second splintered the lock. And on the third, the door swung open and the smell poured out. Not the smell of an abandoned apartment, but something else. Old cooking and old blood. Something rotting that should not still be rotting after all this time. Inside, the family was frozen, huddled in the corner of the living room, pale and unable to speak or move. The assistants carried them out one by one. Then the cleansing began. For over an hour, Master Lee worked, chanting in a low, steady drone that vibrated in the chest, burning talismans whose smoke curled upward into shapes that should not have held. He drew protective seals on the walls, on the floor, on the door frame, and the strokes of red ink seemed to glow in the dim light. The furniture was dragged out, the brown sofa, the dining table, the television, the wardrobe. Everything the dead had touched was hauled into the hallway and thrown away. Nothing was kept. The family survived. The children recovered, although the younger boy never spoke about what happened in the dark that night. Mr. Wong tried to sell the apartment, but the cleaner had told others, and the neighbors knew. No ordinary buyer would touch it. He sold it at a deep loss to a specialist, an investor who dealt in stigmatized properties. Even that buyer never moved in. The unit remains empty. Late at night, on the 9th floor, if you stand in the darkness between the dead bulbs, you can still hear it. Fingernails dragging patiently along the inside of the walls. In Hong Kong, getting a public housing flat can change your life. The wait list takes years, and some people wait their whole lives for a letter that never comes. When Sam and his wife received theirs, they could not believe it. They had been waiting for almost a decade. The flat was small, a living room, a bedroom, a kitchen the size of a closet. After years of renting a subdivided room barely wider than a single bed, they finally had a proper home. On moving day, Sam carried boxes through the corridor, past identical metal gates painted in faded greens and browns. The building was old, and it showed. The fluorescent lights buzzed, the floor tiles were cracked in places, and the lift always arrived with a shudder. But none of that mattered. Eager to start well, Sam bought small gifts and went door to door to greet his new neighbors. An old man on the left accepted with a grin. A young couple down the hall invited him in for tea. Everyone was friendly, everyone except the woman next door. Her metal gate was closed. A grill of iron bars painted the same faded green as all the others. Through the spaces between the bars, he could see her silhouette, a young woman standing just inside the darkness of her flat. She did not open the gate. She spoke through it in a voice so soft it barely reached him. She thanked him. but she could not accept the gift. She apologized and closed the inner door. Sam thought nothing of it. Some people kept to themselves. He went back inside and unpacked. The first few weeks were peaceful. Then the singing started. It came through the shared wall late at night. A woman's voice, soft and slow, singing an old melody that seemed to belong to another time. Not loud, not threatening. Just there, like a radio playing in another room. Sam would lie awake, listening to it filter through the plaster. At first, he tried to ignore it. But the singing came every night, always around 2 in the morning. The same melody, the same faint voice, always drifting through the wall when the rest of the building was silent. Weeks passed. Sam's patience wore thin. He would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to stop. His wife could sleep through it, but Sam could not. The singing had become a noise he could not escape, soft, persistent, always there. One night, he had enough. He got out of bed and walked to the front door in his sleep clothes. The corridor was empty, and still, the single fluorescent tube casting its sickly light down the length of the hallway. He stood before her metal gate. He did not want to wake the whole floor. He knocked on the iron bars. A firm knock, 3 times. From inside, a woman's voice, soft, apologetic. "I am so sorry for the noise. I won't do it again." Her voice was gentle, almost kind. It drained the anger out of him. He stood there for a moment, feeling foolish, then turned and walked back to his flat. The singing stopped that night, and the next night, and the night after that. True to her word, she never sang again. Months passed. Life settled into routine. Sam almost forgot about the woman next door. He never saw her come or go. Her metal gate was always closed. But he did not think about it. People had their own lives. Then came the Mid-Autumn Festival. Neighbors gathered in the corridor with mooncakes and lanterns. Children ran between the adults, laughing. Sam stood with a group of neighbors, eating and talking. The mood was warm, festive. Sam, feeling comfortable, mentioned the woman next door. "She used to sing at night," he said, shaking his head with a rueful smile. "Drove me crazy. But I knocked on her door once, and she stopped. Quiet ever since." The adults stopped eating. Someone set down their mooncake with a soft click. A few of them exchanged glances. An old man from down the hall spoke, his voice low and careful. "You haven't seen her." It was not a question. "Before you moved in," the old man said, "the young woman in that flat, she committed suicide. Burned charcoal in a sealed room. Families have moved in since. A few. None of them stayed long." Sam stared at him. He wanted to laugh, to tell the old man he was wrong. But the silence of the adults told him otherwise. He walked back to her gate. The iron bars looked the same as always. A faded green grill, locked from the outside with a small padlock. He had never noticed it before, but it had always been there, holding the gate shut from the corridor side. Why would a gate be locked from the outside if someone lived inside? He noticed the small frosted glass window set into the wall next to the gate, left slightly ajar for ventilation. Through the narrow gap between the frosted pane and its frame, only darkness. Not the darkness of a room with its lights off, but something deeper. The stillness of a space that has been emptied and sealed for months. He pressed his eye to the gap. The flat was stripped bare. No furniture, no curtains. The floor was dark with settled dust. The kitchen counters were empty. The only light came from the window at the far end of the flat, casting a pale rectangle across the bare concrete floor. The rest was black. His wife bought paper offerings the next evening. She knelt in the corridor outside the woman's gate and lit them. Paper money and paper clothes, burning in a small metal bin. The smoke curled upward, carrying the apology into the dark. They could not move. This was their home. The wait list would take years again. They would have to live with what they knew. Years passed. They had children. The flat became crowded. Toys on the floor. Clothes drying on a rack by the window. the sounds of a family filling the small space. New neighbors came and went from the flat next door. They never stayed longer than a few months. And sometimes, late at night, when the children were asleep and the building was quiet, Sam would hear it again. A woman's voice, soft and slow, singing that old melody from behind the sealed door. But now she sang more gently, as if she knew they were listening. As if, after all those years, she had accepted the apology. Eventually, they used a housing policy, overcrowded conditions with 2 children, to apply for a transfer. The letter came. A new flat, larger, in a different estate. On their last night in the building, Sam stood in the corridor and looked at the closed metal gate. The padlock was still there. The frosted window was still slightly ajar. He listened. Silence. He stood there for a long moment, looking at the closed gate, the padlock, the frosted window still slightly ajar. Then, he picked up the last box and walked. History only leaves us the fragments. The rest lives in the shadows. Thank you for exploring these dark corners with me tonight. If you enjoy where folklore meets history, hit that like button and subscribe to join the circle for our next tale.